So, all right. Well, I guess we can get started. And we want to welcome retired General Special Forces Don Bolduc to our initial GrokGauntlet, which is our version of a newspaper's roundtable with liberal journalists. And I always say that we ask far different questions, and they're generally far more involved than what they do. And that's because we are looking for what our readers are looking for. So, this is for our readers, and as explained in the rules of engagement, that when we get through with all of the Senate candidates that are willing to come in, we're going to put up all the videos so that our readers can see them. So,
perfect.
Yes, we did not think that you would have a problem with that since you've been through this process before.
I have.
So, Steve, do you want to start off or shall I start off?
Well, I'll start, that way we can go around.
Well, let me just say thank you for inviting me. It's great to be here. And as you can see, I came prepared to run the gauntlet.
Yes.
Yes.
But I want to see the helmet too.
Oh, the helmet too?
Yes, of course. You being prepared for a battle. I know that the age is different between the two.
The difference between the two, right? I brought the wrong thing.
I was asking
Miscommunication.
I was asking for a trophy that was presented to the general that had Spartan mottos on it, but he had brought his other Spartan artifact, and that's super, and you can tell us the mottos.
Yes, that's right. Anyways, God bless you all, and thank you for what you do.
Well, this has turned from a hobby to an obsession to people actually think that we do good stuff. So
It's
we're always
hugely
surprised.
important.
And then they think we work at this, whereas in fact we work at almost anything else and do this in our spare time,
Right.
Well, except for me.
which is why you don't see a lot of my writing, but I try to get to events and record them.
Yes. So you are the first candidate in. You are also running for U.S. Senate. And of course the obligatory question is, why would you want to put yourself into that mess?
Well, the obligatory question.
I'm sorry, I just asked the first question.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
It's all right, I'm fine. Go ahead.
Well, I don't like the direction the country is going. And my assessment is it's going in the wrong direction, inconsistent with our values and principles, the purpose of our Declaration of Independence, and I believe that that our Constitution is not being respected by career politicians in a corrupt political party system that is operating on its own interest and not the interests of we the people. And it's forgotten the 52 words in the preamble that are hugely important. And I think it's time for change. And I believe that God has given me the opportunity in my life to have certain experiences which allow me to go to Washington, D.C. and represent the Granite State and do something that hasn't been done in a long time, and that's work for them.
From Ken Eyring, if elected, what assurance do we the voters have that you will not be co-opted by the Washington swamp and forget the promises that you are currently making in order to earn our votes?
Right. You know, and that is probably the best question that anybody can ask. And if you've ever been to any of my town halls or any of the GOP meetings that I go to, I always address that question. How do you know that what I'm telling you I am actually going to go and do and not fall in line like the other career politicians have done in the past? And so I think that some insight into my service in the military as a general officer is applicable, number one. I was the only general officer that objected to President Obama's change in strategy in 2014. Also the strategy in Syria and Iraq, as well as in Africa. And I went up against the military establishment, the general officers, Austin and Millie and the service chiefs, because in my opinion, and I think with a tremendous amount of facts backing it up, we were not giving the right care to our service members for their mental injuries, physical injuries, and spiritual injuries. And as a general officer, I put skin in the game by coming forward and raising my hand and saying, hey, listen, I have these problems. I've been in therapy for these issues. I am better off for it, better in my personal and professional life. We've developed a program inside my division level command that is really an effective program. And the New York Times wrote an article on it, and I received phone calls from higher up saying, hey, listen, this isn't going to bode well for your command or for your future if you keep doing this. And I said, hey, listen, I'm not doing it for me. I'm doing it for the men and women in my command and our families and the organization, which I believe is our higher responsibility. So if your decision is going to be not to promote me to higher levels in general officer ranks, then I'll accept that. But I'm not changing, because this is saving lives, and that's what we're supposed to be in the business of doing. So I've already been there. I have gone against the highest levels of our government when I believed that policy and strategy wasn't consistent with the sacrifice on the ground, and that is men and women dying and filling hospital beds. Secondly, I have a service why. My service why is I lost 72 service members in combat, and every single day I wake up and I make a commitment to them that I will do the right thing and I will serve them, and I will do nothing that discredits their sacrifice and the sacrifice of their families. And that is really the primary reason why I will go down and serve Granite Staters as opposed to the establishment and as opposed to any Republican leader or any kind of other leader. There's just too much at stake, and these service members are near and dear to my heart, and I won't do anything to disgrace them. So when I give my word, I am going to do it. And all I need to be given is the opportunity, and you will see that I will be a man of my word.
Mike?
Based on that approach, General, aside from the demented bleatings of AOC that life's too expensive in DC, life is expensive in DC. Are you going to maintain just a minimal pied-a-terre in Washington and spend as much time as possible in the Granite State with your constituents? Or are you going to live down there, as it were, and come back and see us occasionally?
You mean like Kelly Ayotte?
I was going to mention. So Kelly Ayotte is a famous case in point for the Granite State, because you would have Republican gatherings all the time, and she'd be a featured speaker, and then somebody would stand up and read the letter explaining why she couldn't be there. Mm-hmm. And it happened so often. Kelly Ayotte letter became a standing joke in Republican circles. Mm-hmm. So anyway, but the core question is, are you just going to keep a minimal presence in Washington and spend most of your time here with Sharon and your citizens, or are you going to get a place in DC to be able to be more accessible down there, which obviously has connotations?
Right. No, I'm going to be focusing on the Granite State and focusing my time here. My home will be here. I happen to be in a pretty good situation where my brother and his wife live in Washington, D.C., and they own a pretty big townhome, right? And they've offered me a room there. And so I will be, paying for my groceries and, whatever other, costs that they decide, I need to pay for, which will be minimal, I'm sure. Mm-hmm. So, no, I'm not going to go down there to live. I live in New Hampshire. My focus is New Hampshire. And I have a unique structure in my campaign that I've created over the last year and a half, which is a bottom-up structure to compete against this top-down, money-driven, power-driven, advertisement top-down career politician model, and and I'm finding that it works very well, and it's based off of volunteers, and I have nearly 1,000 volunteers. I have county chairs, area chairs, and I can reach out pretty effectively anywhere in this state that I need to be. I'm probably the only candidate that has visited all 234 towns and cities in this state, and I've had that luxury, in that opportunity, in that honor, because I've been in this campaign for 1.5 years, this one, and if you add the 2 years to the other one, it's 3 years, right? So I've been out on the ground, and I do the bottom-up thing, and so I'm going to convert those county chair positions into paid positions here in the Granite State, where they'll be the focal point for every single county having a place to go to reach out and touch me, and when I come back, taking advantage of the 242 days on the calendar, congressional calendar for constituent support, I will do town halls every time I come back. And so I'll be accountable, responsible, transparent, accessible, and I'll tell people the truth. And they'll have an opportunity to tell me what they're thinking. And it will be a rarity that I send a letter to an event to have it read on my behalf. I've seen what that looks like, right? And it doesn't look good. And especially when you know they're home, or they should be home, right? Meaning they should be in New Hampshire.
That's fantastic, Steve.
Good.
Let me zero in on that. 1,000 volunteers is rather impressive in a small state like this.
Mm-hmm.
But I also know, even though I never served, I studied a lot of events, especially World War II. Had friends who served in Vietnam, because I am of that age, and had a few Special Forces friends. Having studied the Green Berets versus Delta versus SEALs and things like that, Special Forces have a special capability that most of the other special ops don't, which is you work with the quote-unquote indigenous people wherever you are sent to help train them up and to get them organized. So with that lead up, is it a case where you have taken that Special Forces training that you have that is very adaptable, and is that really how you've assembled such an impressive number of people to help you with your campaign? Because you say bottom up, that's how the Special Forces do their training,
Right.
bottom up. So has it been a practical application?
Yes, it has. It's actually my experiences in Special Forces in 28 different countries in Africa, several countries in Europe, South America, pretty much all over the world, Afghanistan, Iraq, other places in the Middle East, has lent itself to this bottom-up, surrounded. I've been quoted in many areas in the military as saying, hey, listen, we're the most effective as Special Operation Forces when we're surrounded by the populace and surrounded by the enemy. And that is the kind of approach I took, was to get out and get surrounded by the populace and to work and to do the coffee breath close meetings with people, get out to places, show up to places, do these things that others don't have the time because they didn't start early enough. And that's really the preparation phase of the campaign, is why we started so early, because you need a lot of time to do this, right? It's easy to spend money. It's easier to, do top down and try and contact people, because you can spend a lot of money on ads and so on and so forth. But so that doesn't take as much time. But I believe it's not as effective, particularly now. And so if you have the time to invest to work bottom up, that's how you're going to make the most impact on folks. That's how you're going to learn the most, and you have an opportunity to really listen to people and actually lead in a way that benefits people from a position of being able to hear what's bothering them directly from them, right? And so the lead up to your question, obviously the answer is yes, and my background lended itself to that. And I was very successful at shaking hands and talking with people and whatever you want to call it, coffee breath close, 3 cups of tea, whatever you want to call it, it works. And I also learned that working on the farm with my grandfather and my father and delivering milk and talking to people out in the communities and understanding their needs and so on and so forth. And so, you know, from early on in my lifetime, I was, you know, kind of exposed to, you know, getting out there and, you know, meeting people, shaking hands, and, you know, doing the public service thing.
Follow up if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
It goes to adaptability. It's one thing to take your strategies and use them here in New Hampshire, where now I think you've become comfortable, having retired and getting back to civilian life. But what are the techniques that you have learned over the decades? How do you now have to twist and adapt to working down in DC?
Mm-hmm.
Which I have to think is going to be far different than what you have done so far.
Yes, you're right, but it's not unlike the experiences I had working at the highest levels of the Pentagon, and, you know, going across the river and working with you know, interagency partners, whether it's the CIA, the FBI, Department of Energy, whatever happened to be the agencies that we had to work with to you know, get something done for the Secretary of Defense or for the President of the United States, to get the interagency together. And that's really an interesting process, right? First thing is, you got to be, you know, you got to be a guy that's willing to work with people, right? You got to be someone who, you know, at the end of the day, when people meet you and talk with you, they find you likable and someone that they can work with. And my priorities are going to be economic prosperity, fiscal stability and responsibility, and the safety and security of Americans at home and abroad. And I think that message will resonate with a lot of people in Congress, to include Democrats, that are tired of the old way of doing business. And I'm hopeful, and I believe, and I have faith that there'll be some changes in Congress, both in the House and in the Senate, that's going to lend itself to a group of people getting together and pushing these truly American problems and setting aside any differences you might have on the social side with a Republican or a Democrat, and getting business done for Granite Staters and the American people, so we can lower inflation. We can reverse this terrible direction we're going with our energy policies. We can create security in the homeland by doing something about our borders and immigration, and we can do something about our you know, our foreign policy and how weak and untrustworthy we look, by just going back to our source documents that have the values and principles in it, and showing that to the world again, that America is back. America's strength is in our values and principles embodied in the Declaration of Independence and supported by an organizational structure of a constitutional republic. And we have gotten so far away from that we've lost credibility with the American people. We certainly have lost credibility with Granite Staters, because I've seen it. But I believe there is this desire, this hope that we can all figure out how to come together and do it. I did it with warlords. I did it with village elders. I did it with the Taliban. I did it with, you know, tribes from Somalia to Senegal to Tunisia to Morocco to Algeria to Nigeria. So I have that experience, and I believe it will serve me well in Washington, D.C. You know, I would go talk to a tribal elder in Cameroon, in the northern part of Cameroon, who's in the middle of a fight with ISIS West Africa and with Boko Haram, and then a few hours later walk into the ambassador's office and, you know, talk to him about his strategy, and then go with the ambassador to the president of Cameroon's office to talk to him about how we were going to help him out. I mean, that's a pretty dynamic day, right? And nobody else has that experience. I do. And I think it's going to help me integrate, adapt, be flexible, and work with others.
In the interest of national security, we've erected this surveillance state which has completely lost control. We're surveilling campaigns, we're surveilling sitting presidents, we're surveilling public individuals, private citizens. It doesn't come up enough, I don't think, but it's a huge problem, and obviously it's a key step to advancing to an authoritarian state. What are your thoughts about surveillance and the red lines for national security and the problem we have with our surveilling agencies just completely losing control of everything?
Right. Well, you know, last election cycle, I didn't really appreciate the concern of the authorities that were given to various agencies for surveillance over Americans and things like that. Because I just got out of the military, and the Patriot Act and other things for Homeland Security and security abroad worked for me in a different way, right? And I hadn't given much thought to the intrusion on the rights of Americans and how we need to balance that. And I believe it's out of balance in favor of an out-of-control government that feels that it can just reach into, you know, an American's living room or into their phone or into their private business and do it. So I hope to be able to do something about that and change that. There definitely has to be a balance, but we're far enough along right now with our Joint Terrorism Task Force, which I've worked with the task forces that we have connected to that with the various countries in the world to prevent another 9/11 from happening. And so I think we need to really divert ourselves to really paying attention to violating, you know, the average American citizen's rights, because I don't like it. I think it's wrong. And, you know, I feel at times that I'm being watched, that I'm being monitored. And
Join the club.
Yeah. and I'm a patriot. I mean, I will default to fighting and dying for this country in a heartbeat, right? I'm not someone they need to worry about, right? But I constantly feel that
Actually, they do fear you.
There's something there.
Because they label all of us as white, male, middle-aged, terrorists. And of course now the new word is Christo-fascist.
Yeah.
Which is cool. But you know, this keeps happening. It happened with Obama, it happened now with the Biden administration. The other is now the terrorist.
Right.
So it's not just you that they're watching.
Right. Oh, I know that, and I don't like it, and I think it's wrong, and it needs to be consistent. And you know, we have enemies. We know these enemies. We have organizations that have their finger on the pulse on them. You know, if you're going to do this to an American, well, you better have the probable cause necessary, and you better be able to back it up, you know, by being able to survive, you know, any kind of due process that the citizen would have against his government for violating their rights, right? I mean, that's the fair thing, right? Yeah, I'm very concerned about it, and as a senator, I want to go down there and I want to dig into it, and I want to figure it out, and I want to protect Americans' rights.
Well, one of the basic problems is you allow these agencies to start up and exist and metastasize, and what seemed like a good idea after 9/11 has become an octopus with tentacles everywhere. But to get back to what you said about Americans' rights being violated and about due process, what do you think about due process for the people who got caught up in the event on January 6th? Because I believe that's what it was, that they got caught up in it, and that there was some agents provocateurs in the crowd. But there's been no habeas corpus for these people. They have not been you know, there's nothing that's really serious that they've been charged with, and they've not been allowed out on any kind of bail.
Right.
And any attempts to get habeas corpus have simply been dismissed.
I'm very concerned about that, and I want to dig into that as well, and I've said that on the campaign trail as well when I've been asked the question, specifically that question. Listen, if you broke the law, you need to be prosecuted in accordance with the law, but you also need to be given due process. And if you got caught up in something and you didn't break the law, you certainly shouldn't be held against your will. And that's wrong, right? And so there's an obligation for me, a United States Senator, and other United States Senators, particularly those people in jail that come from their states that they're constituents of, to really fight hard on this. Hey, why are you holding this person, right? What's the habeas corpus on this, right? Why are you holding them? And if you don't have a good excuse, you need to get them out. I mean, if there's not a valid due process concern, right?
Well, exactly. And these people, they're entitled, as everyone supposedly has been since founding, to a quick and speedy trial in front of a jury of their peers.
Mm-hmm.
And this hasn't happened.
Right.
And it's not being allowed to happen.
Well, we got that, which is clearly wrong, and, you know, we need to dig into it. Of course, you won't find that part of this, you know, January 6th, you know, political theater that's going on right now, right? You won't find that as part of it. And the other thing is, hey, it just opens up the door for other executives to do things like, how about the 9 here in New Hampshire that were arrested?
Sure.
Right? How about them?
Well, we've covered those, and you know, I've met a couple of them.
Mm-hmm. I was there.
And they were only quietly protesting for their rights.
Mm-hmm. That's it. I watched the whole thing. They didn't do anything that warranted them being arrested and hauled out.
Yep.
Nothing. I was
Probably
there.
why they were found innocent. But
Mhm.
again,
Exactly.
your point is, and this is part of that surveillance / authoritarian tick, you know, the knee-jerk reaction was to arrest them.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the knee-jerk reaction should be, they have a right
That's right.
to that.
That's right. The knee-jerk reaction should be the protection of the person and their rights, not the seizing of the person.
Well,
Right?
And the thing is that what the reactions of people in power is, we are in power and this is inconvenient. We shall vanquish it.
Right. That's the other lesson here that I think is a takeaway, particularly from COVID across the country, is executives gone wild, right? With their mandates and everything else that they did, that took away people's rights, that interfered with medical freedom, that continues to interfere with medical freedom, that interferes with people being able to worship, and the inconsistencies with it all. And we find out today that, you know, the mask mandates, the vaccines, the lockdowns were all unnecessary and had
Ineffective.
nominal results, nominal effect on the overall prevention of people getting the virus, right?
It's worse than that. We still don't know long-term effects of the vaccine, but I won't go down that rat hole because that's not a policy matter from your
Right,
point of view.
yeah, exactly.
Except that nobody should be coerced, and
Nobody should be coerced.
we're in violent agreement on that point.
And look, you know, the military now, which I've been very, very boisterous about in both word and in written letter, about their vaccine mandate in the military. They have over 120,000 that aren't getting it. And now the military is considering, and I think they're going to do it, pushing the mandate well down the road, right? The deadline, because they can't afford to lose 120,000 personnel, right?
I didn't
They
know
can't
that.
even recruit people.
No, well, nobody's going to go into the military run by thoroughly modern.
And they can't retain people. And they're releasing people for not getting the vaccine. My son got out of his 6 years of the National Guard here in New Hampshire. He got out by the skin of his teeth. Right? He just got out, right? If, you know, 30 June is the deadline, right? So if they hadn't let him out, you know, if his end of duty, tour of service, wasn't up before that 30 June,
You've had to come face to face with either the jab or
Yeah.
pushed out.
or pushed out, or received some kind of other discharge
Yeah.
when he deserved an honorable discharge. And this is all wrong, and I've been very loud about it, and something I'll also work on. There's no operational requirement for it. We put service members in Ebola environments, and we expect them to do their job and mission, okay? All over the African continent, right? I was in charge of the Ebola outbreak in 2014 and 2015. We didn't close anything down here, and we had outbreaks in Texas, New Jersey, Boston, New York, other places, California. We didn't shut down our country or our economy and interfere with people's rights, and that was Ebola, okay? Come on, this was wrong, it was politically driven. Nobody's really been held accountable for that, and that's unfortunate. But it gets to your point. When executives get to the point where they can just willy-nilly do stuff and dismiss the legislature and send them home, and worse than that, the Speaker of the House and the President of the Senate
Take a walk.
just walk away and don't, follow their, mandate, which is to represent the people, and tell the executive, hey, you can't do that, right? We have 3 co-equal branches of government here, right? We're supposed to be like this, right? We're supposed to be pushing on each other and doing this. And so over time, what's happened is the executive has gotten too much power. The judicial branch is now the ultimate authority, and whatever they say goes, which I disagree with. So now we have a legislature down in Washington, D.C. that's fighting with itself and has relinquished all kinds of power that it should be retaining on behalf of the people. It's a terrible position we're in. They can't come together to do anything for us. It's terrible.
Yep.
Let me put that somewhat differently. Well,
Yeah,
No,
please.
all yours.
we created the 3 co-equal branches of government, judiciary, legislative, and executive. And I agree with you. Legislators have become more, let's flap the gums, especially at the federal level, rather than doing their jobs. Too often, they're not even writing the legislation. They're just, most times, not even reading it. They're letting their staffs do it because they pass too many laws without watching that stuff work. Then they toss it over, because of the Administrative Act of 1948, to the executive branch.
That's right.
And they write regulations as law. How, there's a second part coming after that, but let's stick with that for just a second. With the branches fighting with each other, the legislative branch has suffered the most. It's given up the power. How do you reclaim it? What do you do to motivate not just those that are nominal Republicans versus the Democrats, whose aim, the progressive aim, has always been to make the administrative state and push us out? We saw that with COVID. Dr. Fauci, our guidelines have become law.
That's right.
Where's the
An unelected bureaucrat.
How do you motivate your fellow legislators to say, enough of this nonsense, take back our powers outlined in the Constitution?
Well, I think Biden's given us a great opportunity for that, right? With his executive orders that have ruined our economy and our energy and have left us with a weak homeland security, high crime, opioid crisis, mental health crisis, illicit weapons trafficking. We got a national embarrassment of human trafficking going on. I mean, America is weak and it's hurting. And there's got to be some way to go down there and appeal to people that the only way we're going to strengthen this is by pulling back our power. What? I don't know. I'm not an expert on this, but I don't like the Administrative Act of 1948. I don't think it was something that Congress had the power to do. So why did they do it? Why did they?
Because- I'm going to put something in there because they're cowards.
Yes.
What they are doing is creating vague laws which create agencies which are then delegated the power to make the actual law, and Congress can wash its hands and say, I didn't do that.
Our Constitution didn't intend for 150 organizations within our federal government to make laws. That's not right. That's wrong. There is one law-making body in our Constitution, right? One. We got to get back to that. We got to pull back. The AUMF, Authorized Use of Military Force, that's been in existence since 2001. That hasn't adapted at all. That has put us in places for too long, has resulted in bad policy and strategy, has given the executive way more power, has let Congress off the hook so it doesn't have to answer for anything, and then everybody kowtows to a judicial decision. And that's not how it was supposed to be either. As a matter of fact, they're given the least amount of powers in the Constitution for a reason. You know, Jefferson and many others were afraid what the judiciary would do if they got too much power. But we've given it to them. And, you know, we get down on hand and knee and we genuflect and we kiss their rings because they're all-knowing and all-powerful. That's wrong, too. We have a problem with fundamental understanding of our Constitution. And unlike in the late 1700s and the early 1800s, where 90% of America understood what the Constitution said, we got 90% of America that doesn't understand what the Constitution says and what our government responsibilities are to them, and we got to pull that back. And that takes a national dialogue. That takes somebody talking about it, but nobody's willing to talk about it. Because Congress would like to be the middleman, the gray area, right? We don't have to stand up for anything. All we got to do is make people happy at the top of the triangle. Our special interests, selected lobbyists who leave their watermark on legislations, to your earlier point, on bills and stuff, and the wealthy political elite that finance them to get them reelected over and over and over again. We need change. The problem is career politicians and their corrupt political system that they have put in place that serves themselves and not others. The alternative is, hey, status quo, or put their proxies in, which isn't a good idea either, or go with an outsider who's going to go down there and start kicking trash cans down the hallway like my drill sergeant did when he wanted to change our attitude.
The cultural shift, CRT, the DEIJ stuff to gender stuff. You actually said something that made me think of something funny. You said something, and I heard the word genuflect, and then I heard the word genderflect, which in my head meant the same thing, only you're doing it to the culture gods. And anyway, which is interesting.
Sounds like a post.
It is. I made a note on my phone real quick. But,
word manglers.
that's out of nowhere. I'll be like, it's like they tell you stories about people who just wake up and they have to write stuff down. Mm-hmm. I get these ideas in my head about post titles out of nowhere, and I write them down, and then I may never write the post, but it's there.
You ought to send me the ones you don't use. I'll write a post.
They're only supposed to be 600 words, not 1,200. So this poison is seeping into the military academy, and I know you oppose it, but I want your thoughts on that and what you think happens to the U.S. military if something isn't done to stop this.
Well, clearly the military, if something isn't, let me start there first. If something isn't done to stop it, the military is going to go back into the type of military that it was post-Vietnam. A hollow military, incapable of doing its main mission, and that is fight and win our nation's wars. Recruit the right people to serve and retain them, and then be able to train our officers to be able to lead these men and women, which is the highest honor, when our country calls them to do so to protect this country and our rights and so on and so forth. So, you know, the military academies have not been making mission for many, many years. They produce mediocre officers, and that's a fact. You don't have to go very far but to look at the book that was written a couple years ago called The Cost of Loyalty, and it was written by a 20-year West Point professor to get a really good insight into the downfall of our military academies and our reserve officer training corps program and how it's not making mission for our country with, you know, the right officers to serve for careers. 60% of the officers, the cadets that go to West Point get out after their 5-year commitment. It's not what it's supposed to be. We, the taxpayer, pay $500 million to graduate 900 students. That's what we pay. That's a lot of money. There's more emphasis on the new uniform every week for the football team than there is on, you know, blocking and tackling, you know, and basic leadership stuff, which they're supposed to be learning. ROTC isn't much better. I honestly believe that the best commissioning source is the OCS Officer Candidate School. I went through ROTC. I know how substandard ROTC is, but I had the benefit of being prior enlisted, so I could take the good with the bad and, you know, use it for my own leadership benefit. But I was not happy with the commissioning system I went through, and my son Matthew just finished ROTC in Purdue, right? Didn't get his commission because he wouldn't get the vaccine. So they said, hey, you can't get commissioned, and here's, you know, he was on a 4-year ROTC scholarship, so they said, here's your $37,000 bill that you have to pay within 1 year. Now, how does a kid just getting out of college and just getting a job do that? It's a very unfair process, but I digress. At the end of the day, the American military is being led by political generals and admirals who were cultivated at the end of the Bush administration through the Obama administration. It was a little bit of a hiccup with Trump, but now they're back at it with Biden. And the replacements that are behind them aren't any better than the ones that are there right now. The industrial military complex is as corrupt and polluted as it possibly can be. That needs to be fixed as well. These general officers look for the long wars, look to keep us in these long wars, because when they retire, they get a lot of money to work for the military industrial complex. I was offered $250,000 to start, right? I didn't take it because I didn't agree with it, and it's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to come home. And so we have a strategic Navy that can't do its job. We have a strategic Air Force that can't do its job. We have logistics that can't do its job. We have missile defense, missiles, and we have cyber that can't do its job. And we are placing the emphasis on pronoun training, transgender training, and officers are afraid to speak up for what they see is wrong, because if they do, they'll be like me, General Flynn, and many others that are told, see you later.
I want to follow up on that, because during the Obama years, it was interesting to, well, not really interesting, horrifying, to see the number of general flag and other senior officers being cashiered during the Obama administration.
Mm-hmm.
Just in this last week or so, 15 Navy commanders of various levels, admirals down to captains, have been relieved of duty because of loss of confidence, which I guess is a large term that covers a lot of stuff.
They won't force their guys to get the vaccine.
Yeah, well, there's the vaccine, and that's one thing, but is it a case where you use the word being hollowed out? Is it being wokeified? As you talked about preferred pronouns, I'm suing my school, the Guilford School Board over it. No secret over all of this stuff. But is there the chance that where I mentioned earlier, we are seen as domestic terrorists. The administration talks about the rise of white domestic terrorism when there isn't any. When I look around now with the pro-life pregnancy help centers being bombed by the left, but there's still the Biden administration is still saying, well, no, you don't have to worry about them or Antifa or BLM. It's you guys that once in a while do something stupid. Is it possible that this is being done to our military forces so that, like in other countries, that military force has become political brown shirts against the rest of the country? Because I know from studying what how the left looks at us, they see us as evil, and especially the wokeified coming out of the colleges see us as being subhuman. That any means possible, that we are not to be allowed to speak, we're not allowed to do this, that, and the other thing. We have to be separated, deplatformed, and everything else. Is the process in the military now such that it could be very easy for that military to be used against U.S. citizens? And I know people are going to, when they listen to this later on, they're going to go, he's nuts. Well, it's a hypothetical question, but we've seen it in history in other countries. Just because we're Americans doesn't mean that we are immune to history.
That's exactly right. My biggest fear right now is that the leadership will not stand up, military leadership will not stand up to the, the elected officials, commander-in-chief, the appointed officials, on behalf of the American citizens. And that really worries me, because their first thing out of their mouths after the Afghanistan withdrawal debacle and the loss of 13 Marines and 20 other U.S. citizens or U.S. service members injured seriously, 200 Afghans or so killed, and then 4 days later the bombing of an Afghan home with innocent people in it, right? No one's been held accountable for that. Nobody has been held accountable. There hasn't even, the investigation was a milquetoast investigation that, the whole thing, was just swept under the rug. Every general officer and admiral, from the top down to the guy on the ground, knew what they were being told to do was not feasible, acceptable, or suitable to the safety and security of service members being put in harm's way by their own government without the resources to be able to perform the duties that they were being asked to do. And the answer from those guys should have been a stand up, absolutely not. We can't do this mission unless you give us X, Y, and Z, and this is how we have to do it. And we can get your mission done. If you want out, we'll get you out. But we're not going to do it the way you're telling us to do it, because that is the wrong way. And I have taken an oath, and I have a responsibility to my people. I believe today that the military leadership is so political that they won't challenge the orders of their political leadership, and I believe that would be to the detriment of U.S. civilians.
How far down the organization do you think that has gone? We know the general officer class are politicized, the general officers and thoroughly modern military hopeless cases, not to mention admiral.
I think it goes down to...
does it go down to maybe colonel level so that you've not got the resistance far enough up? Because you've got these smaller divisions that, well, division may be the wrong word, where people, the soldiers, the NCO, the junior officers are all sworn to the Constitution, At what point does that break? And is there enough resistance further down if they were given a really bad order?
There's resistance below the 06 level, right? Which is captain in the Navy and colonel in the other services, right? Lieutenant colonels, majors, captains, lieutenants, they all see it. They all know. I was just told by a former student of mine who just came back from pulling his NATO defense responsibilities as part of the 1st Infantry Division. And he told me that the military is absolutely not what he expected, and the focus is all on pronoun training and transgender training and all these other other social things that there's less training for, there's less money for training, for rounds, for people to be able to maintain their expertise. Training is interrupted for this other social type training stuff, CRT training. I mean, it's unbelievable what's going on. But the Stu Schellers of the world are out there.
Stu Scheller being...
Stu Scheller being...
Lieutenant Colonel who dared to speak out against
Oh, yes.
command
Yeah.
for the debacle of the withdrawal from Afghanistan.
And I hosted him.
Who came to New Hampshire to
Yes.
support General Bolduc. And I was fortunate enough to catch at one of the town halls. You should have seen the recording.
Yes.
Right, exactly. And I knew as soon as I saw what he did, if he had been one of my officers, he probably wouldn't have to do it because I would have already been doing it on his behalf. However, he did it, and I knew that the repercussions on that were going to be absolutely terrible. So I reached out trying to get a hold of him, but I ended up getting a hold of his parents. And I stayed shoulder to shoulder with them the whole time as they worked through this court-martial, imprisonment, and he was just, that's what they'll do, right? That's what they'll do. They'll stop at nothing to squash you, and he was right. He wasn't wrong. You can argue about the method all day long, but I applaud service members that tell me what I need to hear, not what I want to hear. And our leadership, they needed to hear it, right?
I've been there, General. In a well-run force, regardless of which nationality, the senior NCOs and maybe the mid-level officers as well have the knowledge, have the experience, know how things work.
Yep.
And when some squeaky clean new officer comes along and doesn't know anything yet, it's these people that tell them how things work and help guide them along and make them successful. So, as a senior NCO, you're guiding the junior officers. As a mid-level officer, you're guiding the general class to understand the strategy and the tactics and the way things have to work. And if these people are determined not to take that advice, it doesn't matter whether it's forces, it doesn't matter whether it's business. If you ignore your experienced people, you're doomed to failure.
That's exactly right. You are. And, getting back to your previous point, our commissioning systems aren't doing their job. They need to be really looked at, and we need reform there. Our military needs reform. We need to change the climate and culture of the military back to one of what its mission is, and that is to organize, to recruit, organize, train, retain, resource a military that can win our nation's wars. And right now, we don't have that military. And that is bad.
Whose turn is it? Bud?
Me.
Okay.
And that's a good place for us to segue. So, another fad is the push towards the green technologies. They're not green, but we won't go there.
Yes, we will.
wind and solar and all that good stuff. And no matter what you believe about emissions or the technology that they're trying to use to replace it, you can't run a military without fossil fuels, right?
No.
Can you explain that so people understand it?
Well, I think I can. I mean, fossil fuels are an integral part of running our military and everything about our military, whether it's the Army and its wheeled and tracked vehicles and its helicopters and its aircraft, or it's our strategic Navy that requires fossil fuels and requires predominantly now nuclear energy in order to be able to maintain its fleets out to sea, both surface and subsurface, by the way. We need the fossil fuels for the jets that take off. You know, I guess, you know, the movie Maverick is a great example, right? Everybody's seeing that movie now, right? Well, hey, without fossil fuel, forget about that, right? They'd be pointing at each other, right? We wouldn't be able to get off the deck. So at the end of the day, that's an integral part of what we do. We've come a long way in the military with, you know, battery-powered things, but it's unreliable, and it's heavy, and it's difficult for the average infantryman to deal with battery-operated stuff, right? It just is. And but in Africa, in our remote areas, we have solar-powered suitcases that we use in order to purify water, right? There is application for that, but that prevents us from having to drop in or ship in, you know, pallets and pallets of drinking water in plastic bottles, right? So we need all the energy and use it in a way where it complements each other so that we can do the mission. But the military is in no way, and I've heard the Department of Defense's, I've seen the Department of Defense's estimates on going completely battery-operated military to somewhere around 2030. No way. No way, no how. That's just not going to happen. Maybe by 3000 we might get there, right? But definitely not by 2030 or 2035. And I believe they're just saying that so they don't really have to say no to the White House, right? Mm-hmm. But the answer is no, we can't go there, and certainly we would give up such a strategic advantage against China, Russia, North Korea, Iran if we tried to transition our military to electric vehicles. We'd have dead tanks, we'd have dead APCs, you know, armored personnel carriers. We'd have,
like in Ukraine,
yeah,
that are Russian made.
Yeah, I mean, they wouldn't be able to move. They'd be, you know, well, they'd be targets first, and then, you know, second, you know, just left, you know, on the battlefield. I mean, we would be destroying them in place. That's what we'd end up doing. And then we'd be using fossil fuel powered vehicles to exfil our guys out of danger, right? I mean, this is just such a colossal bad idea. The whole energy policy of this administration is a step backwards and just terrible on its merit. It has no merit, right? You know, we take painful precautions not to pollute with our diesel and our gas and so on when we conduct operations. More so than any of our partners when we land in Africa, right? We're worried about spillage, we're worried about that. They could care less, right? So we're very conscious about that. We're very conscious about balancing the environment, operating in the environment safely, but we cannot operate our military, we can't even operate our society without without fossil fuels.
You know, it's
And you're not going to be able to build the equipment without fossil fuels.
no. Well, it's a simple question of energy density. I think those are the words you're looking for.
Yeah.
Burn, baby, burn. The stuff that has to be able to move quick
Mm-hmm.
and carry its fuel source with it has to run on fossil fuels because nothing else will work.
How are you going to, right now we refuel in air, so we can do transatlantic and around the world flights, right? So we can fly from, an air base on the East Coast all the way to Afghanistan if we have to. And we do in-fuel flight. How are we going to do in-fuel or in-flight battery swap outs? Right? It's not going to happen, right? We're going to limit the distance that we can go. How are we going to go into overdrive, into Mach 4, and, do dives and compete with, Soviet aircraft, China, or anybody else in air-to-air fights? It's just not going to happen, right? How's our nuclear force going to operate, right? How are we going to balance that, It's just not going to work, right? It's impossible. I don't know if that's enough.
That's fine. I mean,
Examples there, but
another part of that is lubrication and moving parts.
That's right.
Majority of that, I mean, there are synthetics. There's lots of them, but at the end of the day, you need petroleum products to make lubricants that will keep everything moving, and everything moves. Everything's got moving parts. There's no...
See this right here?
Yes.
It's got lubricant. Right? Even back in the day, they figured out how to use fat and grease and stuff like that to keep these parts moving. Right? It's the same thing. And this is, antiquity, baby. I mean, this is, medieval, right?
Mhm.
I mean, come on. Let's get real here. It's just not
Stop
feasible.
killing the pigs, we need the grease.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just not going to work. And anyone who thinks it is, and any energy that we're putting into it, is absolutely wasted energy when there's so much more that needs to be done. The weakening of our military for a green political agenda is a hugely bad idea.
Mike?
Sure. Got to be asked at least once of a Senate candidate. What is your view of the 17th Amendment, and would you work to repeal it if you could get enough votes?
I think the 17th Amendment should go away. And I'm going to operate as if the 17th Amendment has gone away. That I could be recalled at a moment's notice for not doing the right thing for Granite Staters in the state of New Hampshire, right? That is my focus, and that should be everybody's focus.
Have the applause here. Yeah. Exactly, and I regard it as the Bought and Paid For Senators Act.
It's exactly what it is. And it's created career politicians and all the benefits that go along with it, and everything that they do to operate at the expense of the people that they're supposed to serve. And that is wrong.
It's good.
Let's see if we can shift away from the military. Obviously, it plays to your strength, but now I want to see if we can get us to ask questions that are now more civilian oriented. And some of it's going to be, what is the proper role of government in your mind? Should government be directing society, or society directing government, as we broke bread a little bit earlier ago? There's also financial stuff to talk about. Given the extreme debt that we have now run up, $30 trillion, is it even fiscally possible to pay that back? But the question I want to come up is more a current event, two events coming up, because you're going to be dealing with the culture wars. And I tend to think that you understand the culture war, because you were describing it writ small in the military with wokeness overdriving mission. Today, SCOTUS came out with the decision that against New York, that basically did away with their shall issue permits for guns, which was extremely difficult to handle, to get, to being more of a permissionless carry like we have here in New Hampshire, constitutional carry. There can be very few restrictions put on it. They can restrict it to sensitive areas, but not to the point to go so many that it's impossible to carry. Last cycle, you ran into a little bit of a buzzsaw, and I was there for that, where you said that the right to have firearms was not an individual one, but a collective one based on a militia, and you used the 14th Amendment. And I think you took a fair amount of heat on that, and you corrected yourself. So with today's decision, is it, and now we have 25 states that have constitutional carry. No permit, no asking daddy, daddy government, which I think is rather amusing when you think that the Second Amendment was meant to fight against a tyrannical government for which we have to ask a permit for to be able to fight them. Well, it is. And then we have
Is there a question in here, Counselor?
Yes, there is. I want to get a sense of where you are at now with respect to firearms, be they handguns, long guns. Can I get me an F-35? What is a weapon of war? Now, what is it? What does the word arms mean in both the Second Amendment and New Hampshire Constitution, Article 2B?
Okay. Well, first of all, I applaud the Supreme Court decision today, and I am an advocate of, nationwide constitutional carry, because I believe that you're right. The Second Amendment doesn't stipulate we should need a permit, because ultimately that is to defend ourselves against a tyrannical government, right? And I believe that people in this country, law-abiding citizens, people that do not break the law, people that you are responsible, should be able to own any firearm that they want to own within their means. I don't know what else to say.
So would that invalidate the 38? So I could own a machine gun if
Yes.
I'm a law-abiding.
Exactly. Why not?
Thank you.
Why not?
Well, that's been my point for quite some time.
You're a law-abiding citizen and you have the means. Machine guns are expensive, right? If you have the means to be able to buy and purchase a machine gun and you're a law-abiding citizen, then you should be able to buy a machine gun and own it.
And what do you think about politicians like New York Governor Herschel, who is basically saying, how dare you take that, put our citizens at risk for more gun violence by making it possible for them to just go and get them without our permission. And I'm going to ask that from a philosophical standpoint of, should politicians be thinking that way, period? Or are we combining that with, I don't like what the Constitution says, I don't like what the Supreme Court says, I'm not going to obey it as a politician or a high-ranking official within any state or federal administration. And that ties into what's going to come out next week, probably Roe versus Wade, where a lot of the prosecutors are going to say, we're not going to enforce those anti-abortion laws.
Well, so obviously I don't agree with the governor of New York, and I think she's way off base, and I think that she doesn't have a fundamental understanding of the Constitution, and I think she's not looking at where the real problem is. And the real problem is with a lot of your New York laws that enable criminals to have weapons and criminals to do bad things against law-abiding citizens in your state. And you should deal with that first before you go after and talk about, oh, the gun's the issue. people are always the issue. People are always the ones that you have to react to, not an inanimate object, right? And so she's way off base. Trust me, I have compassion for people who are victims of shootings, of guns, or of anything, right? But at the end of the day, law-abiding citizens have their rights. We have the Constitution. It says what it says, and nobody should ever disregard the Constitution, particularly someone who's sworn to take the oath to protect the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. That should never happen. And they're way off base. They're not dealing with the problem. They have a political issue to divide people, to create disunity, and that is the emotional part of the gun, right? And they take that and they mislead the public, which is another thing that they shouldn't be doing. And they're supposed to create not fear and uncertainty, right, and more control. They're supposed to create confidence. They're supposed to create an environment in which people are safe and secure. Well, they have gone the other way and have given the criminal so many get out of jail cards, so many bail rights, so many things where the police officer is still doing paperwork while the felon's been released to go back out on the street to do bad things. Why don't, Governor, you deal with that problem? And then you'll probably find that you're going to have less problems in other areas of crime in your cities and in your state. I mean, that's just my position, right? First of all, I don't even think the federal level should be involved. It's state business to begin with, right? And
As far as what is concerned?
as far as, the 10th Amendment, and states should be allowed, I mean, the federal government shouldn't try to control everything that states do, right? But I would caveat that by saying, if I had the opportunity to vote for a nationwide constitutional carry, I would vote yes for that.
And what would be your rationale for that? Under what part of the Constitution gives you that? What is the enumerated power within the Constitution that would give the federal government to pass such legislation?
Well, being familiar with the enumerated powers, let's see. Ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense. That, I get that might be the military, but it could include personal defense. Right?
That's a preamble. It's not part of the.
Well, yes, I know it's a preamble, but it's 52 words that really set up the rest of the Constitution, right?
Well, the Declaration of Independence set the philosophical standpoint for the Constitution.
Yep, the purpose of
it. The
it.
preamble is just a summary, but without legal standing. It's the articles that do it.
Yes, and you'll find that each one of the articles, to include the Bill of Rights, really protects all those things, right, in the preamble.
Well, legally, not so much. The enumerated powers.
Well, it should.
Well, the enumerated articles are the enumerated powers.
Right, I get that.
So, in each one, each branch has its specific duties within the federal government.
Well, the federal government can create laws, right? And this is a law that's good for people of the country.
Well,
but I would prefer the states to do it, but at the end of the day, you got 25 states, right?
Well,
how do we get Americans to be able to carry weapons countrywide on federal lands and everything else? Is it the state level that can do that, or is it the federal level in one sweeping motion?
I think the answer is what happened today, where the Constitution itself, where the Second Amendment has been the raggedy-looking second stepchild.
Yeah.
I had to get one good line in.
That's
tonight.
true, that's true.
Redhead
Well, you get the Supreme Court to do its actual job and say, these laws violate the Constitution, they don't have any power.
They don't have any power, right?
Right.
So,
and
so
the question is how do we bring governors up like New York's up to say you cannot do those kinds of things?
Yeah, I think it's gonna be impossible to do that. I don't think you'll ever get a governor in California that can agree on that, or anywhere else.
We'll see, but I think.
But it'll take time.
But my point is, in trying to come back with you, I don't think it's the federal government's job to say there should be a national reciprocity.
I don't either.
Because there isn't an enumerated.
But I would like to expedite it.
It would.
That's my point.
Well, I think.
Right?
And I get that point, but it's also a case of, we see a lot of senators saying, okay, our infrastructure is dying.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you should remember my question. What does the Constitution say about infrastructure as far
Post office and post office roads.
Give that person a cigar.
and an extra star on his shoulder.
Yes.
Right.
And that's kind of where I'm going with this, because the Constitution...
I agree. The government is unlimited at this point. It's too big. It's in everybody's business. 175,000 pages
Yep.
of a register that govern every
Federal
aspect of
register.
our lives, and we need to get the federal government out of our lives. I agree 100%.
So let me sort of put it a different way to keep the discussion rolling.
Mm-hmm.
There's essentially three parts of the Constitution that are in conflict here. First of all, the Second Amendment that says essentially shall not be infringed, which means government can't stop you from doing this.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is that the Second Amendment is written for the federal government, which says that the federal government can't stop you doing this, which means that all federal arms control laws are null and void. Second, in the 9th and 10th Amendments, the police powers are retained by the sovereign states, which
That's
means
correct.
the states
Yep.
can regulate things. And many states have or began with their own equivalent of the Second Amendment,
Right.
saying this state can't do that. The problem is many of them have evolved under progressivism to the point where they think they can regulate firearms, which is how we get to today's decision. And that then brings us to a differently conflicting part of the Constitution, the 14th Amendment, about due process and essentially uniformity of law. And that's about the only way I see the federal government being able to say, you can't do that to my citizens.
Yeah, because the second has now, with Heller,
Heller and McDonald in
McDonald,
Chicago. Yeah.
and now with today's, it has absolutely been enrolled under the 14th Amendment.
It has.
Which clears that way of doing it. So that's why when you said national reciprocity, I decided to pick on you just a little bit. But you redeemed yourself with the infrastructure.
Yes.
And,
Well,
and it's a problem. It's a problem with the federal government trying to tell the states what to do. And the 14th Amendment is, in a way, a camel's nose under the tent. In the same way that the Commerce Clause has become a camel's nose under the tent for the government to regulate stuff which is...
It took away the tent poles.
yeah. Yeah. But I don't think there's any...
Out of turn?
I don't think there's, I think we're on the same sheet of music when it comes to the, the Second Amendment, the ownership of firearms, the fact that we need to keep the federal government out of our business, and that every single state now that tries to do what New York did is not going to be able to do it. And that's a good thing, right? And they may have to look at what...
change its pistol revolver license because you need one in order to go in, like, to be on school grounds, for example, with a firearm. You have to have.
Right.
Yep.
You have to have permission.
Well, that's what the progressives would call a loophole in the gun-free school zones.
But in New Hampshire's application, they ask you why you want one.
Yeah.
Why do you want this permit? What am I supposed to write? Because the Fed said I have to get one? Is that the answer? I mean, is the...
Right.
Well, they have to accept any answer you give them.
Yes, they do.
Which, I testified at the New Hampshire House saying, okay, if you're going to do this to me...
Who has the black Subaru? Do you have your keys? It's raining. I want to roll the windows up for you.
Victor has the keys. You could have just asked for Victor.
Thank you, sir.
No problem.
Now, that's quite the application for give your keys if you're gonna be drinking.
Mm-hmm.
Victor, how well do you do a stick transmission?
Well, he doesn't have that
Probably does a
opposable
breath
thumb,
test,
so
though.
it's kind of...
So here's the question I want to ask you, along the same vein.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, Senator Cornyn of Texas is being spitballed heavily by those of us on the right for even participating with the Democrats with this latest gotta do something after Uvalde school shooting. And they're now going to send money to the states to help them implement red flag laws. Here in New Hampshire, we've avoided a similar thing where the federal government promised us $3, the last time, probably 15 years ago, $3.56 per driver to make us wear seatbelts. In other words, bribing.
Right.
That was the big yahoo about Sununu taking the COVID money.
Right.
And David Werner, I need him to start writing again.
Yes.
So put pressure on him when you see him in your breakfast meetings.
Yeah.
Basically said we've given up our state sovereignty by contract, with the contracts giving us money. What would you do to stop that practice of the federal government taking our money from us, coming up with legislation, and then making us do a mandate, but saying, oh, but you will do this, but we'll give you money in compensation. That was your own citizens anyways. So what's the difference?
Yeah, well, obviously I don't agree with that, and I'm a huge and very loud as far as my campaign goes. I'm against federal funding that comes with strings attached that force us to do things that ultimately imprison us, right? Or require us to have future restrictions that we don't even know is coming yet, which is a huge problem as well. They can just make stuff up, and because you took this money, guess what? Now you gotta follow these mandates, which is hugely dangerous. I don't support that at all, and I've already posted and put out that I would have voted no on this bill that they just passed, and I don't agree with Cornyn at all, and I think he's wrong, right?
Well, Cornyn is not noted for his constitutionality.
Yeah, and I heard him today talking about it, and he's full of crap. Oh, this isn't going to have any negative results on Americans in gun ownership and this, and he's full of it. He's absolutely wrong. It's going to do a lot of damage to us, and I think it's federal overreach, right? And I don't think it's the business of the Senate. And I think they're focusing on the wrong problem.
They always are. If he's saying that kind of stuff, that makes him less conservative than Tulsi Gabbard. I say that being well informed, having interviewed her. She's a gun grabber, but she's a soft gun grabber. She's about red flag laws and stuff.
Yes, she is. I just talked to her the other day.
And she answers very carefully if you ask her these questions, which is how I know that's really where she's going. But she's actually more careful about how she puts it than John Cornyn is.
Yeah. This legislation is going to result in very bad things, and it's going to force states to do very bad things, and that is unacceptable.
Now would be a really good time for Sununu to sign HB 1178. Not that it'll apply necessarily.
Not that it'll apply, but it is a good time for him to do
It's a good start. It'd be a good time for him to step up.
We don't have to follow their rules in the state of New Hampshire.
You don't even need a bill for that.
No, you don't. We got a
That's the whole
constitution.
problem. We're coming up with more bills.
No
Anyway.
void and of no effect.
One of the things the U.S. Senate is supposed to do, but hasn't done much lately, is approve treaties. And not that it doesn't approve treaties, because it doesn't approve treaties. It hasn't approved a lot of treaties. But the executive branch is still acting like they've been approved. What do you do as a U.S. Senator in response to that?
Well, you know what? I've said it, and I'm going to say it again. We need to review every single treaty that we have across the board, and I believe that there's many of them out there that are bad for this country, and we need to get rid of them. this whole idea of climate treaties, or this treaty, or that treaty, whatever you want to call it, and the operating principle that I've heard many times out of people in the Senate and in Congress, it's better to have a treaty than not. That's absolutely wrong. It's not good policy, and it's not good to have a treaty that is not good for the United States, period. And that's the way we should stand. And I think we have a lot of treaties with China and a lot of treaties with other countries that need to be vacated because they work against us. It's just the way I feel.
Bravo.
We got it.
Yeah. But here's the slippery problem.
Mm-hmm.
When the Constitution was written, founders thought that each branch would jealously guard its powers.
Mm-hmm.
What we've seen that over the last 5 decades is not so much each branch protecting its powers, but each political party preserving its power.
Mm-hmm.
And it runs through all three, as we see in how Congress works between the House and the Senate,
Mm-hmm.
in conjunction with whoever's sitting in the Oval Office. And, you know, we're seeing the politicization of the Supreme Court, regardless of what Roberts thinks is it's an independent independent judiciary, because we can tell just from the way that
Roberts is no better than David Souter.
yeah, but we can see that based on how the decisions or opinions are written.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any ideas of how to put it back to where it's the branch versus party versus party?
Mm-hmm.
Or is the political philosophy between the two parties, and sometimes within a party, you know, you're looking at the middle, the centrist Democrats versus the outright socialists. You're seeing the go along to get along squishy Republicans in the middle,
Mm-hmm.
versus those of us who say the Constitution is not livable. It's a legal document, each and every single word.
Correct.
What do you do?
Well, first of all, I think the confirmation process has become political theater and a big joke. And I don't agree with political parties. I don't like them. I think they're dysfunctional. I think they work against us. And I agree with Washington and others that have suggested and have actually said that political parties will be the undoing of America internally. And I believe that's where we're headed right now with these two political parties. I do not believe that the president, just because he nominates somebody, should get that person to serve as a secretary or in any other position that he nominates somebody for. We should have a confirmation process that is not political theater, that rolls up the sleeves and absolutely picks a person that is right for the country. Not because the president wants that person, right? I have recently read the book Team of Rivals, Abraham Lincoln, and his choice of cabinet members and why he did his cabinet members. And he didn't pick them because they were people in his party or people, that, served in the previous administration or did whatever, right? He picked them because they were the right people for the job, and he believed that they would serve our country the best, but more importantly, would tell him what he needed to hear, not what he wanted to hear, and wouldn't be rubber stamps. And, look at what we got with the Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of State and the Attorney General and everybody else from one administration to the next. Just a bunch of people that go along to move along or keep their job, and it's hurting America. And, we gotta get people down there that are going to push back against what has evolved into, I believe, think tank people that serve in government and work their way up the Democrat Party and the Republican Party and are just check-the-block people, right? Oh, Blinken was the Undersecretary of State for Obama, so now, and then he goes for 4 years, right? And he's at a think tank, and he's making a bunch of money, and then he comes back to the Biden administration, a Democrat administration, and he's Secretary of State. The guy was a terrible undersecretary. Anybody that served in that administration, like I did in the military, knows it. He was weak, milquetoast. The Secretary of State was terrible under Obama, right? I mean, it was terrible. It brought us Benghazi, it brought us Libya, it brought us poor strategy in Afghanistan, Syria, Africa.
What did Hillary say of Libya? We came, we saw, he died.
Yeah. I mean, come on. We got to get real here. We got to start taking our responsibilities as senators and representatives seriously. And we're not there to play political party games. We're not there to ingratiate the president because he's a Republican or a Democrat or anybody else. We're there to serve the people and do the right thing by the Constitution and do the right thing by the people that we're there to represent. And, we got to get people down there that are actually going to believe in doing that. And I'm going to be one of them.
Your turn.
I'm all set.
You all set? You got another one? If not, I do.
I think not. I think every which way you've told us that you're going to support the Constitution and try and put the agencies and legislatures back in the box. Actually, that gives me one good question. How would you go about getting rid of some or all of these 150 agencies which have sent forth a multitude of agents to eat out our substance?
To do what?
That's a quote from the founders.
Right.
He hath sent forth a multitude of agents to eat out our substance.
Yeah.
As in King George.
Yeah. Well,
And we have all these agencies, and they're all sucking us dry.
they are sucking us dry. We have, over 450 departments and agencies with 2.6 million people in them. And we got to do a serious look at our government, right? We got to do a serious look at the Department of Education, the EPA, the Department of Energy, and other agencies that just sit around and just suck off of the teat of the taxpayer, right? And don't contribute to a limited government, right?
And that's fine, General. I'm going to stop you for a second.
Right.
Because the question I asked,
Oh, okay.
and that's a pointed one, is what would you do to rally the senators, the troops, to get rid of some of these agencies? I know they all need looking at.
Yeah.
Presidents since Ronald Reagan have been trying to undo the education department, and it's still there.
Yeah.
How would you rally sufficient support to get rid of some of them?
Well, the only way to do it is to get after their budgets, right? And I would love nothing better than to sit on the Finance Committee, where I understand the federal budget. I had to deal with the federal budget. I had a budget of $26 billion where I had to account for every penny and follow the same budget process that they follow, except I had to have mine in on time. If I didn't, people would die, right? Where they consider, $50 million a rounding error. And that's absolutely wrong. So it's accountability of ourselves. It's the passing of a budget on time. We just passed a terrible budget for 2022 in June of 2022, right? I mean, that was supposed to be done 1 October of last year, and it wasn't. And we're well on our way to not having a budget for 2023, and the spending is just out of control. And so we need to do, how about a suspension of all congressional spending until we roll back significantly our debt.
Frankly, I wish we'd all put them into a dorm wearing orange jumpsuits every time they came out of the dorm so we'd know who they are, but that's beside the point.
I mean,
That's from channel over at Weekend Pundit. That's
Yeah,
it.
I mean, it's a huge problem, right? And you're right, and to his point, we are a bunch of criminals down there, right? Taking money irresponsibly from the taxpayer and using it inappropriately for things outside of the enumerated powers that we are given in the Constitution.
Okay. Given what the proper role of government should be,
Mm-hmm.
we're not there anymore. Haven't been for decades. In your estimation, and I have my own, I've said it often on Granite Crock, give me some of the areas that you would use to say, what is the root problem? People will have different ideas of what that root problem is, of how did we get there to where we are here?
Mm-hmm.
But which is the worst root problem that you can think of that has given rise to everything that we've talked about so far today? All of the examples we've talked about, the little bit of philosophy we've talked about, what is the root cause of why we don't do what we should?
Career politicians and corrupt political parties.
That's part of it. Is that the root cause though? How did they get that way?
How did they get that way?
Yeah.
The 17th Amendment is one way they got that way.
Okay, and how did the 17th Amendment? I'm going to keep pushing you backwards.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Well, it allowed the popular election of senators to go down to Washington, D.C. and completely disregard their state.
And
They're no
why,
longer accountable.
why did that 17th Amendment be brought forth in the first place? Who brought it up?
Well, it was brought up in what, 1913?
Yep.
Yeah.
By
Huh?
what kind of people?
It was the progressives. It was the
Yeah, it was the
Wilson people.
the progressive era.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
they came from the progressive ideas. They used the word progressive because they really were socialists, but they knew it wouldn't fly.
Mm-hmm.
Where did that come from?
Where did the socialist ideas come from?
Yeah, and why did we turn from being constitutionalist to more of the administrative state? Well, this is just one area, and I'm going to try to switch us real quick.
Right.
And I'm trying to get you to think, and I know you're an academic as well, because
Right.
you are a professor. Where's the root cause back to that? Where did we switch from being a constitution state to a non-constitutional state? Where's the genesis of that in your mind? And how is it mutated?
Right. The genesis of it?
The genesis of how, let me see if I can explain this better, faster. And I'm willing to get help from my two Groxers here. There had to become the idea of the Constitution sucks.
Mm-hmm.
Where did it come from? Why did we allow it to grow? How did people back then, when that 17th Amendment was passed, in order to change us from being a constitutionally based country, what is the institution that is at most blamed for getting us from there to here?
What institution?
Yeah.
Well, our political institution, and I believe
But that's preceded by something else.
well, how about the undermining of our education system?
There you go.
Ding,
Bingo.
ding, 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 ding.
Yeah, Thomas
Academics.
Dewey, and what was his name?
Mancoos? No, that was in the 60s. Dewey.
Yeah, there's Dewey, and there was the other guy that was the guy who wrote the book about the administrative state from that Woodrow Wilson followed.
Yeah, I'll look
This is-
that up in a second.
This is where we need Glenn Beck's chalkboard, because he'd be frothing at the mouth at the mention of the word
Yeah, I'll
Woodrow
look it up.
Wilson.
Right.
I'll look it up.
Well,
But anyways,
yes,
that's
it's the
kind of what I
undermining
was-
of our education, and it's the undermining of academia, and it's the infiltration of academia of people who believe that our country was established based off of slavery and institutional racism, which is completely inaccurate, and they teach that now, along with many, many other concepts that were born of that era, And now we have 3 generations of Americans who hate our country, don't appreciate our country, and want to change it into something that looks more socialist than our constitutional republic. And that is hugely dangerous. And we need a national narrative on that. We need people to go down there and point this out and say, hey, this is wrong direction. It was wrong back then. It's taken them a long time to do it.
Mansell House. And some, I think, Mansell.
You've been thinking
Well,
hard on that one.
Well, I've also got Dwight Waldo, which is, I don't think the right one, but he talked about the administrative state. That's really what I was trying to focus in on. And I'm sorry if I couldn't frame the question well enough to get that across.
Well, I finally got there, but at the end of the day, listen, my platform is God, family, community, and country. We've removed God from the public square to our detriment. We've undermined our values and principles and the purpose of our Declaration of Independence, and we're now trying to, and have been for a while, peeling apart our constitutional republic and our Constitution gradually, legally, through the courts and through executive decision, because the Congress has decided, hey, we'd rather be the gray man. We don't want anything to stick to us because we want to continue to get elected and operate at the expense of the people we're supposed to serve, because we got it quite comfortable right now, don't we? And that's how they think. And we need to get people down there that don't want that. That's why me as a candidate is a huge threat to the establishment. Huge threat.
I have seen that. So, I think we're pretty much done with the questions. We're at the end of our 2 hours.
All right.
I want to say thank you very much, not only for the discussion here in the living room at Mike's house, but also earlier in the dining room.
Edward Mansell House,
Yep.
who wrote the book Philip Drew, DRU, Administrator,
Yes.
which was the guidelines, the instruction manual for Woodrow Wilson, in the same way that George Orwell is the instruction manual for today's
For today's problems, right. Yes.
Make Orwell
Exactly.
fiction again.
Exactly. Exactly.
So,
Make Orwell fiction.
but
Well, I want to thank you for the opportunity, because this is not just a discussion, it's a learning experience, right? And it's hugely useful, because if anybody sitting in this chair thinks they know everything and thinks they got all the right answers, they're absolutely wrong. That's why it's more important that their approach is open-minded, and the reason for wanting to serve is because they want to make this country stronger, our community stronger, our family stronger, and we want to get God back into the public square. Because the absence of God in the public square has been the root of all our problems.
I would agree.
This
It's a
Constitution
good
is
one.
fit for a good and moral people and wholly unsuitable for any other.
Yeah.
That's right,
So
exactly.
one last question.
Yes, sir.
Do you have either already established or in your mind to be established a kitchen cabinet whose only purpose is to keep you on the straight and narrow of the things that we've talked about today? You just answered what your platform is. Who are those? Do you have people already signed up or that you're thinking about that will say, yeah, these guys or those gals are going to skewer me if I take one step outside of that vote line?
Well, Sharon for a start.
Yeah,
That's kind of a built-in.
yeah, of course I have my wife, but at the end of the day, yes, I do have people in mind for that.
Okay.
And I believe it's hugely important. And I do have people that, in my mind, that believe in our American strength agenda and the tenets that support that: God, family, community, country. And they will keep me on the straight and narrow, right? I mean, I've evolved significantly as a person and as a candidate and as someone who wants to serve others over the last 3 years.
That's obvious.
And so that in and itself should be a lesson to people that, hey, this guy is a guy who wants to do the right thing. He's going to do the right thing. He's going to hold himself to a standard. and he's going to be accountable and responsible to others. And I think I've proven that over the last 3 years. I honestly do. And no other candidate is in the same position as me to be able to make that kind of assertion, because they haven't been in the arena like I have. In this arena. They might have been in other arenas, but not this one.
All right.
Very good. Well, we thank you.
Thank you very much. Before we turn the cameras off, one last thing, the Spartan stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Why did your troops present you with that trophy memento with the 3 Spartan mottos, and can you remember what the 3 are now?
Yeah, so one of course is Depresso Liber, which is to free the oppressed, because that's what we believe in, right? The second one is Molon Labe, which is come and take it, which is, you know, hey, listen, you want to take my freedoms away, you want to take my liberties away, you want to take anything associated with that away, you want to take my weapons of war away, you want to take my ability to protect myself, my family, and my country, then come and take it, right? And in their minds, I was that kind of leader, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I was the kind of leader that would always default to helping those that need help, right? In a public service way. And then the third one is, you know, fortune favors the bold, right? You have to be able to take chances. You have to be able to risk things that are important to you and go out and get them, and to stand up for your people, right? And if you do that, sooner or later, you will be rewarded for it. You'll receive the fortune, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is, you know, God, family, community, country, and the persistence of this great nation and everything that it was founded for and what it can be, and the idea that each and every single one of us has a responsibility to form a more perfect union from one generation to the next. And the men and women in my command saw that in me, right?
And you were rewarded.
And by the way, I was chatting with a young soldier the other day, and she reported that she'd been talking with other soldiers that mentioned you as one of the great leaders of the Afghan conflict.
Mm.
So your word gets around amongst soldiers that you're still being talked about.
Yeah.
And you were also selected as one of those candidates by the Special Forces PAC, a brand new one,
That's right.
as being one of their folks that is being supported.
Started by non-commissioned officers, by the way.
I noticed that.
Well, that's where the strength is. Just like in civilian life, it's the middle class.
Mm-hmm.
It's the middle class that progressives hate.
Right.
It's the middle officers and senior NCOs that the faulty brass hate, because they are where the honesty and integrity is. And I'll say last thing. Having been there, done that in lots of ways. There's 2 things.
I have run the gauntlet, baby.
Yes, you have.
You must lead from the front. Yeah, you don't send anybody where you won't go yourself.
That's right.
And luck is what you make it.
That's right.
So, and I say fortune favors the Bolduc.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for coming in.
Grok TV.